Hello, packages, parsers, and programs. Oh, how I love the history of named vulns. They have such a variety of techniques and targeted protocols, all leading to terrible consequences. SQL Slammer wormed its way over UDP. Heartbleed leaked secrets via pre-auth TLS. Rowhammer reached root by clobbering DRAM. OpenClaw waited for people to download it. And so this week, we talk with Keith Hoodlet about growing research teams and the AppSec skills to develop in a world of development with LLMs. Think of a name and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Generative AI is powerful, but it comes with real risks, from prompt injection to data leakage misuse and agentic AI. The OWASP Gen AI Security Project unites a global community of expert practitioners who tackle these challenges every day. Together, they've built practical playbooks, adoption guides, and the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs, resources any team can apply right now to strengthen AI security. And it doesn't stop there. This is open source, built by practitioners, for practitioners, working together to secure generative AI. Visit securityweekly.com/OWASP to use the playbooks and join the effort to protect tomorrow's intelligence today. Ever feel like your network infrastructure is stuck in the past? Meet Meter, the company reimagining what it means to get and stay online. Meter delivers full-stack networking, wired, wireless, and cellular, all in one seamless, scalable, and secure solution. From hardware design and firmware to software deployment and support, Meter streamlines every part of your network while giving you all the control and transparency you need. Whether you're managing a branch office, retail stores, or a massive data center, Meter gives you performance, reliability, and the visibility you need to stay in control. Thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Go to securityweekly.com/meter to book a demo now. That's securityweekly.com/meter, METER. This is episode 376, recorded March 30th, 2026. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John. Good to see you.
Hey, happy Monday, happy Tuesday.
Happy Monday, happy Tuesday.
Survived RSA.
Survived RSA. I did about 24 interviews with folks there. So we're going to be playing those on this show and a couple others. But right now, we've got some more fun live interviews with Keith Hoodlet, who's the director of security research at 1Password, where he's building a world-class team of vulnerability researchers. In addition to being a pioneer in AI bias bounty hunting, which is a pretty cool niche, Keith previously led the AI, ML, and application security team at Trail of Bits. Obviously, we cover a handful of their blog posts every once in a while. Always great writing. He holds both the OSCP and OSWA certifications, and of course, is the former host and a very frequent and welcome guest here at ASW. Hello, Keith. Thanks for joining us again.
Hey, Mike. Hey, John. Good to be back.
So one of the things I got to, for our listeners to know, I got to actually meet Keith in person over B-Sides right after Keith had given his presentation. And Keith, your presentation, I think, is very topical because it's about We Pwned the Night. I'm just going to give away the title because that was public. I'll let you talk about it in a moment. But I wanted to set it up in the sense that John in particular was bringing up the ideas of what are the skills that new grads need for AppSec, especially as things are moving so fast with AI, LLMs, agents, etc., and even people changing roles, shifting roles, people, even if you are, I'll say, mature in your AppSec career, it's important to keep skills up. And so that's definitely a topic we want to lean into. And I'll say, hey, listeners, let us know, what questions do you have? What are areas we can answer for you? And with that, Keith, start answering those questions. Tell us a little bit about your B-Sides presentation. You pwned the night, but there's a little more detail to that.
Yeah, so title was We Pwn the Night, Growing and Leading an Elite Security Research Team, which was ironically my experience at Trail of Bits, where we grew the team by about a little over 25% in 2025. And our goal, or at least sort of my personal goal and an experiment that we ran, was to try and have every person we hired find zero-day vulnerabilities within their first 45 days joining the company. And we were successful in that. So I talked in the conference talk about a few of those individuals who have public CVEs and vulnerabilities that they disclosed. And they were good ones. In my opinion, they were bangers, as they say, right? So what was interesting to me about that whole experience, though, was really the shift that we saw over 2025 in the way that AI played a role in security research work, especially toward the October, November timeframe. But then just the amount of things we saw as well that were flooding our inbox when it came from AI, just automating profiles, automating resumes, automating responses to our application pool. And as a hiring manager, that also made things sort of challenging. So I definitely have advice for individuals that are trying to stand out, as well as hiring managers that are trying to filter out the noise. So happy to get into that if that's interesting to you as well. But yeah, overall, I think the talk went well. It seemed well received. The slides are public, so we can definitely make sure those are in the show notes for people to go and check out. And I think the talk was recorded, so eventually that will also become public.
Yeah, B-Sides is really good about turning those recordings around pretty quickly. And indeed, the slides have a lovely neon synthwave look to them. So obviously that part's going to catch my eye. But let's talk about, maybe I'll work a little bit backwards from what you were describing about the AI-assisted research. So I'm curious to, I'm going to try to limit myself to just a two-part question rather than rattle off a bunch of questions and make sure you remember exactly what I requested.
Sure.
What was the relative, so the researchers you hired, what was the relative span of their seniority, or let's say industry experience? And how did that tie into either what they found or even how they were using the AI tooling as part of finding these cool 0 days?
Yeah, so in the case of the individuals we hired, I would say none of them, to my knowledge, used AI tooling in their particular vulnerability discovery. It was actually some of the individuals toward the end of the year who were augmented more by that. Yeah, so the humans still managed to find and exploit 0 days. But to give you a sort of a range there, so Will Vandevanter, who was one of the individuals who found vulnerabilities in NVIDIA Triton Inference Server, CVSS 9.8 RCE unauthenticated. So fun. He has been in the industry, for more than a decade, probably closer to 15 years. He wrote Serpico, for those who remember the tool back in the day. And he actually had his own startup for a little while, worked at GuidePoint, I think, before that. But so he's been around the block for a while, and he was definitely retooling some of his skills into hacking AI systems. So he's now an AI security engineer. Whereas Axel Mirchuk came out of one of the banks in Canada. So he was an application security person working in the finance industry. And he was pretty exceptional in terms of his reverse engineering skill sets, is what we discovered. He had all the traditional AppSec skills that you might imagine, static analysis, some fuzzing, things of that nature. But he really surprised me in his way to just reverse engineer this medical device. It's an Ion Torrent 1Touch 2 from Thermo Fisher Scientific, my former employer. And he really went to town on it. So he had, I think, 4 or 5 CVSS 9.0 or above unauthenticated RCEs, things like that, account takeovers, etc. And then Darius Houle was a senior engineer before he joined us, moved around some startups. And again, someone that I think really surprised me in terms of his ability to go deep on looking at frameworks. So he found a integrity checking bypass in Electron, where he was able to successfully backdoor and install keyloggers in Signal, Slack, 1Password, Chromium-based browsers, you name it, because of the way that V8 heap snapshots are not integrity checked by otherwise protected code bases for those integrity checked applications. So funny story on Darius's side. That was a CVSS 6.3 for his, because you needed local access to be able to do the backdooring. But the thing that I found really funny in his research is when I asked him, what about cryptography wallets? Like, surely those must be integrity checked. Turns out almost none of them are. So they're just vulnerable to this by default, like out there in the wild. So if you've got cryptocurrency in a wallet somewhere that's run on an Electron, yeah, probably not great. So I'm just going to throw that one out there.
But what's interesting about that list too is that's also a very wide variety of targets. You had, let's say, very modern, very topical, the AI tooling, AI infrastructure, the embedded devices, right, from the and reverse engineering. So that's pretty awesome and a different skill set. And then just now playing around with Electron and all the people. JavaScript is a little bit old. I'm not going to call it legacy by this point. It's not going anywhere, but pretty familiar. So already, if I'm a new grad trying to figure out where do I want to focus my efforts, do I pick one of those of AI, reverse engineering, and binary analysis, or just JavaScript isn't going away? How does somebody get to the point where you're going to hire them, Keith?
Yeah, I think part of that is, I like to use an analogy here. And I think when you're a new grad, you fit into what's called, and these are all like capital letters. So when you're envisioning these shapes that I'm about to give you, think of them in the capital letter tense. So you have what are called T-shaped people, right? They have a lot of breadth and their depth is on one topic, and they go really deep on that one topic. And those are usually people who are early in career, right? They've experienced some high level number of things, but they go deep on one topic. And then eventually they turn into F-shaped people. So they have some breadth at the top, they have some depth and some breadth toward the middle, and then they have that one area that's still their niche. And eventually when they're much later in career, they become an E-shaped person where they have breadth and depth in several areas now, right? They can sort of work parallel. And so I think when you're starting out, it's important to get that exposure to a breadth of different challenges in the space, whether it's fuzzing, reverse engineering, static analysis, exploit development, you name it. And I think in many ways, AI tooling now becomes just one more skill to build in terms of understanding how that functions, how to bring that into your workflow, how to make the things that you're trying to accomplish that much more informed. And it's a good, as people sort of use the term rubber duck. So, you can use it to sort of perform introspection on the way that maybe a code base works or that a tool works. And sometimes it's right and sometimes it's wrong. And it's important to validate everything that you're learning, because when it's wrong, it actually helps reinforce that learning that, hey, actually, that thing is misinforming me here. I should be a little bit skeptical, and I'm going to go spend the time to learn appropriately the correct answer because the things it's telling me aren't working. And that is a nice reinforcement loop for the human to make sure that, hey, like the training data is out of date or the reinforcement learning is just like incorrect here. Maybe it pulled in, pizza recipes with glue from Reddit, for example.
Part of that too, I want to expand the conversation in the sense of what the skills are, because obviously, trail of bits, you are hiring for security researchers, finding those vulns, and obviously successful in those 0 days within those first 45 days. So definitely a double thumbs up there. I want to, and this may be my own tilting at windmills, I want to think that AppSec isn't just finding the bugs, it's more than just finding those flaws. If I say that in the sense of you're a blue team or you're writing the security guardrails, do those letters change? You got to go from T, E, and F to C and C++ and GO and RUST. I can't make that metaphor work too well, but I think you see where I'm going. And this is where I also want to make sure to bring in John too, because I know you're currently much more, I think, hiring the engineering side and looking at those engineering skills rather than just, can you find this flaw?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm sort of staring out the window thinking about what Keith was saying there about the E and Fs, and we see that in software developers too, right? I think Keith, as a manager, senior manager, I actually guide new developers to go down a single path and learn that well, right? And then come back up and do other things. I think you'd say that for engineers in general. My head nowadays, and we'll probably talk about this across many episodes, is I'm trying to figure out where is that line between the robot versus the human, and like what Trail of Bits is doing is like, you're not just looking for security engineers, you're looking for really damn good ones, right? It's a pretty credible statement to say within 45 days that people are finding, severe vulnerabilities. So where I'm going is like how much, when we think about teaching people the tools or using the tools or what you're looking for, I'm sort of daydreaming, wondering, how much that can the robot do right now, and how quickly are they going to catch up to some of the things you're talking about. So, and then how does that affect who we're hiring and how we're hiring them? Like they go from, I at any company I've been at, I really sort of index off of, I love working with people who learn quickly or are willing to sort of dive deep and figure something out. Does that become even more important now? I think it does, leading question, but.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I would say about security engineers now is you do have to, especially the security researchers we were hiring at Trail of Bits and that we're now hiring at 1Password for my team, is that you do have to understand how programs work and how programming works. And so I think the primitives of programming still remain important. And once you know enough of them, carrying over that knowledge of loops and recursion and object-oriented programming, or if you're doing something that's not object-oriented, like understanding how control flow works inside of an application is really important. Memory management. I mean, C and C++ are still an important thing to understand how to do good memory management in, and so many people are moving toward Rust. But while I was still at Trail of Bits, we would have companies that would come to us who were vibe coding applications in Rust. And the number of memory leaks we saw that, granted, weren't exploitable in the same way that you might see from like a C or C++ perspective, would cause the application to make your system basically unusable within a couple of hours of having it run. And so I do think that there are still fundamental knowledge elements that go into this, and then you can carry across. Like if you're a security researcher, maybe you know Golang and you know Python and you know C++, well, you can probably pretty quickly leverage a large language model to help you understand maybe some of the interesting idiosyncrasies of JavaScript and async callbacks and things like that, right? Like you can sort of grok that pretty quickly. And I don't mean grok as in like Elon Musk's tool. I mean like, think about it, deeply and understand it in a quick manner. So I do think in many ways it's sort of a nice, like, hey, you do need to know the fundamentals and you do need to understand how these things work, but you can also use large language models to help you bridge the gap of that understanding that much faster.
There's an interesting aspect there to what we're both talking about. I'm hiring developers to create something from scratch, usually, or update or maintain a software application, right? Versus, and that's a very forward-looking statement. Versus, I think you can say a security researcher is backwards facing because you're working on an application which already exists. So you have to know the application stacks, which we've been working with for the last 5 years, hopefully not too much more. And I wonder how that affects education in either of those spaces.
Well, I think that's very true. Security research and vulnerability research is very much like the thing exists, but in many ways as well. And I see this in my current role at 1Password, but I also saw some of this at Trail of Bits, is you'll have teams that will come to you with plans or like PRDs, and they'll bring forward this concept of a feature that they want to build into an application. And you have to be able to sort of anticipate what the challenges are going to be in that application from a security context and be able to provide that advice to say, hey, if you're going to implement this in this way, here are the guardrails, here are the mechanisms that you need to make sure are included. Good example is like AWS had this thing that existed for something like 8 months where there was a very small window for account deletion, where if someone were to spawn up a new session in the process of that account deletion and session deletion taking place, they could effectively create a perpetual session that was like sort of in the dark on their ecosystem, right? And so understanding where a database lock should exist and for how long and under what context, really important from a security context because of the session element. So you both need to be able to say, hey, you're doing something sensitive around features for users, and you need to make sure that you're doing good locks and unlocks in a way that is intentional. And LLMs may or may not be able to grab that intention, but a security researcher and a software engineer and a security an AppSec engineer in general should be able to think about forward looking and then also look backward to say like, oh yeah, you messed this up and here's how.
So, you messed this up and here's how. Well, that's definitely going on a t-shirt. Taking that, what you've described in so many words, I think, is threat modeling, which is wonderful. And I appreciate, too, that you describe threat modeling without using jargon, without actually saying threat modeling, because I think it just comes, so many people do it naturally that I think it's a practice more people do as part of critical thinking than they realize. What I want to take that next is you described, well, what could go wrong? Where are the boundaries? Are you writing that out as is that a discussion you're having with your fellow humans, AppSec folks and developers? Or are these days, is that switch now, you're writing that out as a markdown file in your skills or to give to that agent, and that markdown file is saying, okay, go build this in Rust or whatever language of your choice, but have some good session management and this, and then I got to do it because I do it every episode, comma, but make it secure. How is your skills file any longer than, just one line?
Make no mistakes, right? Like, an important instruction. I think this is where I come back with the meme, like, porque no los dos, right? I think in this situation, you do want to have skills files and hooks and various things that you're introducing to large language models, because one of the things that is beginning to happen at most companies at scale is the software engineers are moving faster with agentic engineering, or as we used to call it, vibe coding. But they're now doing so in ways that are much more, aligned doesn't feel like the right term, but perhaps guided or directed. And so because of that, the AppSec engineering team needs to be able to keep pace, and doing human-driven review of pull requests for security context is becoming untenable as a scale problem. So because of that, you do sort of need a collection of being involved in the right conversations when features are being designed. We've always needed to be there in this whole quote unquote shift left paradigm of being involved at the planning stage. But also, you need to have good static analysis, fuzzing, other like unit integration tests, things of that nature to make sure that the feature is working appropriately and that it has, early detections to these problems. And then also, if you can catch it when the AI is agentically engineering that code, that hopefully it will actually, succeed in including or introducing those guardrails. I will just leave one comment, which is skills and even hooks in some regards aren't deterministic in terms of their quote unquote hit rate. You may get something like a 20% hit rate where it will actually refer to the skill that it's supposed to be using at that point in time. You can improve that. You can make that better with certain things like limiting your skills file to 200 lines and reducing the description to like 2 or 3 lines and using all capitals use when instructions. Like there are little things you can do to help improve that quote unquote hit rate. But again, you're not going to be perfect. And so you need to have a layered defense.
I think all those little things show how still early we are in these tools, presuming they keep growing. I guess the interesting part to me is once the idiot figures out that we don't have to tell it every time, all caps, that's when things are going to get interesting, at least to me.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm sort of in the same boat, John. And it was funny, Mike, you were there for the conversation at lunch last Sunday where we talked about small language models. And there were a couple of interesting papers that came out, and I'll make sure I share them across so that you can put them in the show notes. But we had NVIDIA come out and say that small language models are the future of agentic workflows. And similarly, we had OpenAI come out with a paper talking about why large language models hallucinate. And in that paper, OpenAI said they can build small language models that never hallucinate. So in my mind, if we can get to a world where we have small language models that actually never hallucinate and do a good job of following security guidance and guardrails in a way that allows code to come across and be much less exploitable or vulnerable to, memory leaks or other such problems, we're probably in a better place. I also think, though, as a sort of corollary to that is that we're still going to run into these scale problems where you have big companies with brownfield applications and a monolith with multi-million lines of code. And the shared library model of authentication is probably used by your humans, but is not used by your AI. And so you have, new iterations of auth-n or auth-z problems every time an agent starts writing some code, which leads to its own, pile of needles.
And I think that's a part that resonates a lot with me in the sense of software quality, because you mentioned before, there's some LLMs that could write some Rust that may be memory safe-ish, but it's still leaking, or it's going to, as you said, is going to blow up your heap, blow up your stack eventually. And here with the small language models made me think of that too. It's just in the economics of writing code. Why have we were joking just now about keep your skills file to 200 lines, use some capital letters, have something else that has context so you don't actually have to spend the same amount of tokens every single time you're trying to write a function. And to me, I still feel there's going to be humans strongly are the loop, riff on that a little bit, of just the design and the architecture of the code, and maybe just leaning on the LLMs or the SLMs to say, go implement this one aspect, basically, reverse this red-black tree, which nobody's ever had to do outside of a dumb engineering interview. But where I'm going with that is just to try and tie it back to the premise at the beginning. How much of those skills do you see hiring managers looking for? Or conversely, a different way of asking the question, if you want to take it this way, how do you practice those skills? How do you practice writing up a skills.md file that's going to be usable? Is that something that you should be practicing anyway?
I mean, I do think, and I answered a question very similar during the talk, which is I do think large language models are going to play a role, or language models of some size are going to play a role in the career of individuals into the future. And so getting familiar with the capabilities is likely to your benefit, but not being so tied to it as to fall prey to like stale, use cases. Like MCP used to be all the rage, and some people are still trying to use it, but out on the frontier, that's not really a thing that people are using very much anymore, as an example. And that's maybe a year old, thereabouts, So I do think there are a set of skills, and I cover it in one of my blog posts from last year that was mostly guided toward like graduates and, people early in career, called If I Were 18 Again. And in that post, I think being able to read and write long form content is going to be a valuable skill regardless of your interface, whether it's a language model or a human, because you need to be able to read and understand documentation to ensure that it is in fact working the way you intended when you go back and look at the code. And writing long form content is good from providing context to a language model so that it's building the thing that you want it to build, but also communicating the intentions, the desires, the outcomes that you're aiming for with other human beings who are, generally speaking, working asynchronously in some fashion. I mean, some companies love to have meetings after meetings, but I feel bad for those folks that have to live in those worlds. Slack is now the place, I think, where a lot of people end up working, and being good at both of those skills is really important.
And I will love any blog post that talks about the importance and appreciates reading and writing long form. So you easily get a thumbs up from me. But the reason I highlight that too is that it ties back into software development. I'm going to posit is a social endeavor in the sense of what decisions are we making? We could have fun with what are the three classic problems of computer science. I'm sure between the three of us, we'll get 15 different classic problems of computer science. Have fun, but those are discussions that engineering is a deliberation of trade-offs. It's not, this is the one and only way to do this. This is one and only way to maybe do authentication. But once you have that token, what's the management of it? Where are the security boundaries? And I guess really, I'm trying to figure out the question to bring you both back into this conversation. But what I'll add is there was reading and writing. There was develop critical thinking skills in your blog post that I think ties directly into that threat modeling, or just how should we build this software. And I think, but that still feels nebulous. And let me break it this way. How much of that blog post about the if I were 18 again, or even just your recent B-sides presentation, is very much focused on an AppSec as a role of finding bugs, which may be going away with AI, versus AppSec as a role of building the guardrails to prevent those bugs in the first place? Is that a distinction that's useful anymore? Is that even a distinction within AppSec? Or should we just say AppSec is going away and let's just call it software development that's quality software development?
I mean, there is the whole analogy that AppSec is just part of the DevOps Handbook Part 6. So, I mean, there is the, like, it just becomes DevOps again discussion that's worth having at some point. Maybe not on this conversation, but that said, because I could go forever on that one. You probably saw all the tabs in that book just now. Anyway, that said, I do think the idea or the concept of both finding bugs and fixing bugs and building guardrails are all flavors of AppSec that will continue to exist, but the ways that they exist may change over time. And that's been continually true over the last 26 years of a formal industry where this has existed. So where you're going on offense, one of the things that I think is likely to happen is the one standard deviation under the bell curve problems, which there are plenty of. I mean, Jason Haddix, I think, said we're going to hit 1 million CVEs this year. It's one of the side events that I saw him speak at. And
but I'll say,
that said, right. I mean, like,
so
part of it
them
is
are being exploited, right?
Well, I mean, so
far, but I think that is the number of flaws and bugs is interesting because they're the easiest thing for us to track. But it goes back to why should we be talking about there's currently 320,000 or so CVEs? Who cares if we get to 1 million? Why aren't we talking about the secure design? And that's where I'll say, if I were 18 again, as a new grad, should I be learning a framework like React? Because that gets rid of cross-site scripting. That's a stronger default design. Or should I just learn how to write a skills file that tells an LLM, go write this UI, but don't introduce any XSS? Because those are two different ways of approaching that problem.
I'm going to answer that first and sort of stir up the hornet's nest a little bit. One of the thoughts been on my mind, I can't remember if I've said it on here, but one of the thoughts in my mind over the last few weeks is, how do you call the person? The person formerly known as a software developer. Those folks coming out in 2026, 2028, should they be learning a software development language? Or should they be learning how to use the LLM to create software? I'm not the only person asking this. I heard someone else ask this question last week, and I was surprised it wasn't just me. But, like, really, it's do I care if it's in Rust or C or JavaScript? Hot take: I think Rust is actually bad for LLMs, LLM coding. I can explain why later. But, like, do we waste time learning another language when we speak English perfectly fine, or whatever your native language is? You've got 30 seconds. Go ahead.
The hornet's nest has been swatted, especially because I speak like 4 languages at this point. So I do think it is both important to learn some of the language fundamentals, especially learning a scripting language, learning a compiled language that is memory safe, and learning one that is memory unsafe are probably all still worthwhile because, again, you can carry forward those paradigms into other languages into the future or other frameworks in the future. So I do think that is valuable. And I believe that in order to write the skills and audit or validate the code that the LLM is writing on your behalf, you need to know how those work. And this is where I think we're beginning to see a couple of challenges take place, which, one, people are just writing exponentially more code, and they're not actually reading any of that code. But there is something that Cory Doctorow talks about as accountability sinks. And the human in this loop is the accountability sink. They are the person who is going to get blamed in some capacity for the code that their large language model wrote and that they approved the PR for. And so I do believe that there is still a world in which you do need to understand at least some of the fundamentals in, some smattering of core languages that will help you understand how to take these things further. Because especially when you think of, for example, new frameworks. I mean, we haven't seen a new JavaScript framework in a while, but give it 10 minutes and maybe we'll see a new one. Someone will vibe code one with an LLM. But that said, new frameworks, new tools, new packages, new whatever are not something that a large language model can make use of right away. And if it does start to make use of it, it's usually wrong. And that's because, again, an absence of training data, an absence of reinforcement learning, sometimes the documentation is out of date. I saw this when I was at GitHub with CodeQL. CodeQL is publicly available for a large language model to read, but it does a terrible job when it comes to an LLM writing a CodeQL rule because of the way that that language or that framework happens to work.
We covered an example. Yeah, we covered an example of that with GoFix, and even the Go developers were saying we're using GoFix to modernize code because the training is doing old patterns, old types of implementations. And I wanted to jump in there, Keith, with a question of, I was going to preface this with my personal biases. I'll skip that for a second, but should I really care about C++ and C++ 17, the latest versions in smart pointers, or Rust borrow checker? Or should I familiarize myself with the OAuth 2.0 best practices and figure out, did this implementation and design get executed well? Or did this pointer start to leak somewhere?
I mean, the answer is sort of yes. OAuth is often not implemented correctly in most organizations.
But it's written in English language. It's a spec. Why go? Come on.
Yeah, it should be easy, right? It's the thou shalts or shoulds versus musts. It's exactly. Like all those problems, which again gets back to like reading long form content, getting good at reading research papers, reading RFCs, reading those things, and understanding how something should be implemented versus then being able to test how something was implemented gets like a very interesting gap in coverage that leads to vulnerability discovery and exploitation, or maybe exploitation, I think is the posit that you were making, Mike, based on percentage of actually exploited vulns. That being said, I think the fundamentals are really important, and where you start is less important than that you have started and that you continue learning. Because
and let me jump in there, because you said fundamentals. To be clear, what are some good examples of those fundamentals that you have in mind?
Okay, so fundamentals that I have in mind would probably be Python. Understanding and being able to read Python and being able to write Python is a very useful skill. Now, Bash, some people would say yes, some people would say no. I like Bash personally, and I like being able to do things with Bash, but Python gets very interesting very quickly and allows you to do more, including controlling the mouse and the keyboard and all this other fun stuff that you can now do with Claude Dispatch. Anyway, that being said, I think Python is one of the core languages that now is especially important because of the use of Python by so much of the AI landscape, but it was useful before and it will likely continue to be useful after. Compiled languages, Rust is probably the one that I would recommend learning because so many people want to move toward memory safety, and so many people that are trying to do it with large language models are doing it badly. So knowing that and being able to do it right is important, because I think that that's where so much of the C++ world is going. After that, going and learning some of the specs, whether you're in web, OAuth in the web space is a pretty big deal. So understanding how that works, I think, is important. But if you're going to go down the path of learning how large language models operate, maybe you go read some research papers on traditional machine learning, or neural networks or things of that nature to understand the fundamentals behind how a large language model does backpropagation and how it works. And even I struggle to describe backpropagation accurately. So again, like this is supposed to be an area of expertise, but I'm good at breaking the window, not building the window, or the glass pane, as it were. So anyway, all that is to say, fundamentals, get good at a scripting language, probably Python. Get good at a compiled language, probably Rust, but it doesn't hurt to go learn C or C++ because you'll learn why Rust exists. It's sort of like reading the backstory. And you go back to looking at things like COBOL, right? Like COBOL is still used in much of the world's banking infrastructure. People who learn and understand and can write COBOL used to get paid a lot of money and probably are still getting paid a lot of money now, because even if you have an LLM rewrite that COBOL, you still need somebody to validate it, because getting it wrong has very big, very impactful real world consequences. So I didn't think in 2026 I'd be recommending people to learn COBOL, but if you want to get a job and get paid well, it's probably one of those languages that is good to learn, but you won't be able to work remotely when you're learning it. Sorry.
All right, yeah, we're definitely going to revisit that next year. We'll have you back on and check that COBOL. But we're running out of time. This is a really fun conversation. I appreciate it. I want, in the spirit of iteration, John, Keith listed off a couple of fundamentals. In the spirit of iteration, what would you modify, add, subtract? What would you do on top of that? How can we yes and him?
Man, my brain is still a little blown by the concept that people might have to learn how to write prompts in Claude MD files. I've got a family member is working on a new gig, so she's out doing the coding, leak code and stuff like that. And now I'm thinking like, God, is there going to be a version of leak code on like how to write like a proper markdown? I don't know. That's sort of crazy. Yeah, I'm not sold. I think today still a developer needs to learn some of these languages at some point pretty soon. I don't think that's the case. But the interesting part then becomes, so they're a new developer or a new security person. They're doing the pointy clicky thing. At some point, they're going to want a job with Keith wherever he's working then. How do we get them up to that level? So at some point, even if they start with markdowns or whatever have you, we're going to have to think about how do we actually upskill those people and train them into things which the fundamentals they didn't learn. We haven't mentioned in the last half hour machine code, either assembly or just ones and zeros, and what is a fundamental, right? And I think that's what we need to sort of think about.
No, that's great. I think one quick is the leak code made me think of code golf. We so far haven't seen token golf. I predict we'll eventually get there once people start realizing how expensive these are. Mm-hmm. But right now, I think everybody's like doing the opposite and they're trying to get the highest score possible. But that's my slight editorial there. But Keith, take us out. We've been peppering you with lots of questions. What are some good final thoughts, especially what John just brought up there just now?
I think some of the fundamentals that I didn't mention still worth learning. I used to say screen, but Tmux is now the one that people are using, and NeoVim or Vim, and I'm reminded of Vim Golf in particular. I think are both key skills to learn in 2026. If you're used to doing the pointy clicky things, as John talked about, pretty soon you're going to need to know how to do HJKL and being able to navigate Tmux splits or screen sessions. So getting comfortable with some of those POSIX standard tools, I think, is going to become increasingly important for today's young people. Learning Docker and learning how to use containerization and virtual machine, headless virtual machines and things of that nature. All good skills to have as fundamentals in a potentially agentic future.
Yeah, even NVIDIA's OpenShell and all the sandboxing pretty much boils down to use a lot of containers. So if there's one takeaway, it's what Keith just said. Go learn the command line and the containers. Don't have to learn C maybe. But Keith, we can't let you go without requiring you. I'm going to prompt you here. Describe AppSec in 3 words.
Large language, or no, I'm not going to use large language model because that is 3 words. AI, APIs, and terminal.
I was hoping for another A, but no. I'm not going to make you answer because terminal could be, that's ambiguous. You could mean terminal typey, or terminal like it's the end of the world and this is the last thing you can do. But yeah, exactly. We'll leave that as homework for the listeners. Thank you so much, Keith.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it, guys.
Also, shout out, thanks to John as well for keeping this conversation very fun. Please, everyone, stick around for 2 more recorded interviews from last week's RSAC. We'll be talking about more agents and managing non-human identities. That was a pretty big topic. But in any case, thanks for joining us. Please do remember to subscribe. Check out the show notes. We'll throw in the links to a lot of the resources that Keith was mentioning. Share about us on the socials. And speaking of security, check out Through the Breach by Millennium Falk. Add some synthwave to your AppSec. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly. Zero trust is clearly the future as threats get faster, quieter, and harder to detect. But implementing it shouldn't disrupt the business. Threatlocker enforces default deny and execution in a way that remains enterprise-ready, scalable, and operationally clean. Unknown software is stopped cold. trusted apps stay contained and drift is locked down across the environment. It's zero trust that works in real enterprises and prepares you for the threats ahead. See why CISOs are adopting it at securityweekly.com/threatlocker.
Welcome to RSAC 2026. I'm Josh Marpet. Joining me today is Ron Rasin, Chief Strategy Officer at Silverfort. Ron, thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
So Ron, tell me about Silverfort. What does Silverfort do? Give me an overview if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, Silverfort is an identity security company.
Okay.
You might ask, why do you need an identity security company? Because identity management solutions were created and each of them live in their own silo, right? So you have cloud identity providers, you have your identity on-prem, you have identity built into SaaS applications, into cloud infrastructure. And Silverfort is about unifying that in a unified layer of security controls. So we're not about managing your identities, but we're about giving an overlay of security. We secure identities that are on-premise. We secure identities that are cloud native. We secure human identities, obviously. We secure non-human identities like service accounts and even AI agents. So we really take the whole identity security cycle, and that's what we're about.
I've got to ask you. So you said you secure human identities, service accounts, like old school service accounts, right?
Old and new, yeah.
Old and new. Non-human identity, which used to be service accounts, now it's service account plus AI.
Yeah.
And you do AI and agentic AI as well, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Okay. What are the challenges of those different sort of categories? What's the difference? What's so special about these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, the first thing is they're extremely siloed. So you have the human identity spread across different silos, and you have agentic identity and also in different silos and non-human identity. And I think if you look at non-human identities and agentic identity, first of all, it's the sprawl. So you have a good grasp of who are the humans that work for you. You should, right?
You got to pay them. You got
to pay them. You go to the HR system. It's there.
One hopes.
That's a problem, but
unless you fix the glitch.
Yeah.
You know?
But then when you look into non-human identities, it's really hard to understand what you have when you look at AI agents that are being spun up by dev teams, and now you're trying to help your employees adopt AI. You don't know what you have. So the first problem there is just visibility into identities.
Yes, inventorying the identities.
Yeah. So that's the very, very basic, and that's something that I think a lot are attempting to do. Then Silverfort's approach is, I think, fairly unique because we're all about the runtime access control. Everything we do for humans, for AI, we're all about finding the problem, highlighting it, but also enforcing control because that's absolutely necessary with the scale of AI. Just highlighting problems isn't enough anymore.
When you say enforcing control, talk to me about that, if you don't mind.
Okay. We can touch on, you mentioned for humans, the controls are obvious. You can stop a human authentication, prompt for MFA. These are controls that we're used to. But what do you do for let's say, service accounts or non-human identities? It's a different
harder.
story.
Yeah, what do you do?
So if we take service accounts, for example, non-human identities, we detect what they're doing in the network. And then we can what we call virtual fencing. So instead of like a legacy approach that vaults them or, tries to store them somewhere securely and then messes around with rotating them, you love that. We're all about creating virtual fences that limit what the accounts can do only to what they need to do. It's kind of a zero standing privilege or a least privilege approach.
It's least privilege. The same thing we do with humans. It's exactly the same thing we do with humans.
But the twist is for non-human identities with AI agents, it even expands more because now you have agentic systems that usually are way overprivileged.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
A little bit. You ask why? Because the easiest privileges to give an agent you just created is your own.
Yeah.
What identity does a developer have in hand? His own. And we'll fix it later, right? Which never happens.
Well, what we find is that we find AI carrying the credentials of the user with them to do things.
Exactly.
And nobody's really doing very well with that in terms of distinguishing the AI's credentials and authorizations and the user's credentials and authorizations.
Spot on.
Is that something that Silverfort does?
Absolutely. So the first thing is to understand AI agents are much more complex because, first of all, there's the human interacting with them and his credentials that he could allow the agent to work on behalf of him. But also, agentic systems to be useful, they have a huge set of accounts they're using. So I think there's the AI agent, that's the obvious suspect. But then to connect to various apps, to connect to Box, to Salesforce, it needs additional tokens or service accounts or non-human identities to interact.
Right.
So if you think of the agent walking around, he has a big keychain on his hip. You think of a janitor with a keychain.
I love that image. I love that image.
See the agent walking around, robot, and there's that keychain. Now those keys, you have to understand what they can do, what are they privileged to do, what they're actually being used for. And that's key. So we map out the whole agentic system. That's why we see this as an identity security problem, because you really need to understand all of these various accounts, what they can do. But then it's not only about understanding. So we understand, we discover, we have the full identity context. We believe the best point for access control, you need the full context to enforce real-time controls.
Runtime controls.
Runtime controls. Because you could, a lot of approaches are what we call admin time approaches. We'll send you a recommendation. Listen, Mr. Admin, you need to remove some privileges.
Right.
And that's okay. But the scale that AI is happening now, the sprawl is huge. There's no realistic way to chase things at admin time. You have to get in line and get runtime controls in place to immediately solve problems.
I could not agree more, because admins work at human speed. AI works at machine speed.
Exactly.
There's no way to make the two of them sync up properly unless you do it in advance. And most companies just aren't doing it in advance.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. So, okay, so you've got this way to do this for my company, my enterprise, my organization, on-prem, in the cloud, wherever we're doing it, okay? Let me ask you, and this is a tough one, I apologize, but I've got to ask, how about of all of the third parties that I deal with that have AI? Because every SaaS app has AI now.
Yeah.
Do you have any control or inventory or visibility into those third parties?
Absolutely. So first of all, the visibility we collect from all the vendors, you have to have those connectors into the different providers to give full visibility. That's the first and foremost. But then we take it a step further. We work with these providers, providers like the agentic building platforms, like the hyperscalers, Google and Microsoft Copilot Studio, their agent building platform, Microsoft Foundry, Google Vertex AI, Amazon Bedrock Agent Core. We integrate into all of these platforms to enforce runtime access controls by partnering with those platforms. And that's the key, to allow runtime access through the platforms. And we also have, our MCP gateway for, people to bring their own agents and onboard them there. So we really try to have a very broad control plane.
So, okay, out of the AI builder platforms that you mentioned, Copilot Studio, for example, I mean, how integrated are you with them? Like how does it work?
So we're integrated very deeply, and the idea is we are able to enforce any agent that's built within, let's say, Copilot. So we're able to enforce runtime access control and what it's doing. Now, that moves the control from the agent builder, which could be an employee or someone in IT or a developer, to the security teams, because you can't trust each and every developer to have the right controls in place. You have to have that centralized...
Trusting a developer? What, are you crazy?
No,
nothing against developers, but they're there to develop, not to secure.
Yeah.
We need to secure it at the speed that it works.
Exactly.
So, okay, yeah.
So the move fast and break things concept that developers like pioneering, someone needs to...
Yeah, no, it doesn't work for us security people. So, okay, and you mentioned something earlier. You said Copilot Studio, you have an integration with. And I want to pinpoint that specific platform. How good is your integration? Like if I have a Copilot Studio account, okay, to build chatbots for my company or whatever, and a lot of companies do, what can you do for me? Is it just simply turn a switch and all of a sudden you're in there as well?
Yeah, so it's a native integration. We partnered with Microsoft to build it. So it's obviously, very, very, very close partnership.
That's new. That's not something you have out right now.
Well, it's an announce coming up soon, yeah.
But, hey, you heard it here first, everybody. Okay.
Yeah, but it's already available for our customers, and what we essentially do is it's a quick setup in Copilot, and then obviously we discover all the agents you have in Copilot, and then you can create policies that control what those agents can do, and then again, that security, the IAM team has that control over their agents that are being continuously built.
Policy-based control over runtime management of agent privileges, AI, service account, agent, all of the above privileges, right?
Exactly.
It's going to allow me to set not just, you were bad in post the problem, but pre the problem. This is what you're allowed to do. Now let's talk about during a problem. I didn't set a policy properly. An agent goes, ooh, let me see what I can do that. You're also catching that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what happens a lot is agents are created with that much permissions, and they actually need this much. It's classic. You have think of an agent, working with your SharePoint or your Drive or Box.
Absolutely.
Or you choose your file storage system. If you give it your permissions, it can, and you probably need it for collecting data and giving you insights about the data you have. Why should it have your permissions, and why should it be able to delete files, to edit files? It only needs read.
Exactly, and nobody's. Thank you. Okay, keep
Nobody's
going.
limiting it down, right? So you
Right.
have that much permissions where all you need is much lower level of permissions, and that's what will help organizations do.
Okay, so you're able to set the policies, catch it at runtime, and then how's your reporting? Because this is a big one, is reporting to the boards on what permissions and abilities our AI has.
Absolutely. So first of all, we solve the problem. We're not the reporting
Not a
is a
small
retrospect.
thing.
So first
Not
of all,
a small thing, yeah.
And then the next thing is really to surface how things were set up in an overprivileged manner. And since we see everything in runtime, we can recommend and report saying, this is the amount of overprivilege you put in place. Go ahead and fix it in the long run. Okay.
So you educate the developers on how to do it properly.
And build it into the process and life cycle.
That's the thing. Sorry, I'm a big fan of education. If you don't tell the developer what they're doing wrong, they're not going to fix it the next time around.
Exactly.
So you're telling them what's wrong, and you're adding it to the process and the life cycle.
Exactly. So
Love
you can so agents are born secure. That's what we like calling it.
Exactly. There's no need. It's not being rude to them. It's just, this is what you're allowed to do because that's what your job is. Same thing we do to humans. Let's be clear. It's exactly the same thing we do to humans. This is your job. Don't try and step out because we're going to go naughty, bad, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So it's very, very valid stuff. So you're really treating AI and service accounts almost as if they're human. I'm not saying you're feeding them coffee or whatever, but that would probably be bad. But you're treating them like we treat human employees.
I think we're trying to learn a lot of the things that were difficult with human lifecycle management and trying to improve it. And so all the concepts that worked for humans, we need to look to the past, look at all the pitfalls we had as security organizations with humans, and understand how they'll even be harder to maintain with agents. And bring something new to the table, because or else we'll do the same mistakes like we did before. I spoke with a large bank a few days ago, and they said, listen, we have this idea. We're worried about agents having human identity. So the idea that's now being floated around in the bank, that will create an additional identity for each human that will be his agent account, his agent identity. And I told them, listen.
Like a digital twin. Like a digital twin in an identity set.
Yeah. But I told them, listen. You did that with admins. Remember, years ago, you created a lot of admin accounts.
Yeah, you have your user account and your admin account.
Your admin account. And then you realized you need a lot of admin accounts. So each admin account is used only for what it needs to do. So why? And that was a huge sprawl, and it's hard to maintain.
That's why we came out with PAM years ago. Yeah.
Do we really want to make the same mistake with everyone having another Agentic account? Maybe that's not the right approach. Maybe we need just enough, just in time privileges.
These are the privileges you're allowed to delegate to an AI. You're not allowed to, except by exception, you're not allowed to delegate other privileges that you as the human may have, but the AI shouldn't.
Exactly.
Oh, nicely done.
Yeah.
Nicely done. Actually, I really like that. Digital twins. The idea of replicating a physical object in the digital world so you can keep track of what's going on. Hardware bill of materials, software bill of materials type stuff. You're really doing the exact same thing for identity. It's like an identity digital twin.
We're trying to surface, I'd say, what the potential agent can do, what the agent can do potentially, and then reducing to what it actually needs. So I'd say we're handling it at not at a theoretical level, but at the actual runtime
pragmatic level. Yeah, to do it when it matters, when it's actually doing stuff.
Exactly.
I like that.
Thank you.
I like that. No, but that's being pragmatic. We can allow agents to do things. They do it on behalf of users, but the problem is agents have been holding user credentials way too much. And so Silverfort is solving this both at the inventory, at the runtime, and at the policy planning stage.
Exactly.
Am I correct?
100%.
Okay, so there's a few companies trying to do this. Do me a favor. There's a horrible question.
Yeah.
What's special about Silverfort?
So that's a great question. So at Silverfort, what I think is extremely special is we look at this from the identity angle. We believe that there's so much different accounts and identities involved here that you have to have a broad understanding of the identity world. So that's one side that we do special. There's specialized AI security vendors. They look at prompt injection and guardrails and the content. We're about the identity side. So that's one thing that we do special. And we have a very broad identity context.
Right.
The second thing that I think is very unique, and a lot of more legacy identity players don't look at it this way, is we're all about runtime enforcement. So when you combine the identity context with actual runtime enforcement, that's where we are very unique, because we have the broadest context to do great runtime enforcement, which there's other players advocating for runtime enforcement, but they don't have the full context.
Ron, thanks for joining us today. To learn more about Silverfort, please visit securityweekly.com/SilverfortRSAC. And for full RSAC 2026 coverage from Cyber Risk Alliance, visit securityweekly.com/RSAC. Stick around, we'll be back after the break.
Welcome to RSA 2026. I'm Mike Shima. Joining me today is Shashwat Sehgal, CEO and co-founder at P0 Security. Shashwat, thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
So happy to have you. And one of the things we wanted to talk about was AIs everywhere. Let me dive into one of the things that was, to me, really funny from a security perspective. OpenClaw. Everybody wanted to download OpenClaw. It was almost like an RCE or a named vulnerability that people are excited to download and install. That's got to be a pain. That's got to be a headache for organizations. How do you see them dealing with that? Or even aware of that in the first place?
You nailed it, right? First step is even being aware of things that exist. And that's been a challenge with AI in general. Technology has evolved so fast. Anecdotally, I think of myself as someone who's on the bleeding edge of technology in my day-to-day, whether it's my personal life or whether it's my professional life. I cannot stay on top of the latest and greatest in Agentic. I just cannot, right? Every other day, it feels like there's a new Agentic framework that's coming on. So, and this is literally what I do for a living, right? If I cannot do that, what chance do security teams in large Fortune 100 organizations have, right? It's the first time in my career that I've seen technology evolve at such a frightening pace. And it's probably, and the only thing that's even scarier is that this is probably going to continue for a while.
Oh, it absolutely is. Yeah. And I think to your point, last year MCPs are really, really cool. And this year I'm starting to hear, well, maybe MCPs are over. We'll just go straight to the CLI. But the reason I bring that up is also the original MCP protocol spec didn't even mention authentication authorization. A little bit of OAuth, OIDC came later. I'm introducing that concept of identity because you say bleeding edge, but there's got to be some basic groundwork that bleeding edge still needs to be secured. That, is identity still a bleeding edge and cool thing these days?
100%. And I think fundamentally, every organization, large or small, has to solve one problem well, and that is, how do we manage access?
Okay.
What is access? Access can be, if you start from first principles, access can be broken into three components. First is connectivity, second is authn, third is auth, or authentication and authorization, right? Those three always collectively make up access. And that has been as true 30 years ago when we were living in a world of data centers. And it was true 10 years ago when the cloud started. And arguably it's truer than ever before, even now in the age of agentic, right? Let me take a simple example. 30 years ago, what did privileged access look like? Well, to answer that question, we have to answer first, what was a privileged asset?
Okay.
Privileged asset 30 years ago used to be a DB admin account or a root account on a physical server or a physical database that was kept within a data center. If an employee wanted to get privileged access, they had to do three things. They had to first get to the edge of the network, or in other words, solve the connectivity problem.
Yep.
They did that using a VPN. Then they had to solve the authn problem. They did that using a password which was kept in a vault. And last but not the least, they had to solve the authorization problem, right? Which was relatively easy back then. But again, the three problems existed. The technology was different, but the three problems were always there. And fast forward to today, when we are talking about agents, whether they are running locally, whether they're running in the cloud, right? Connectivity problem is really just solved by the internet. But the authentication and the authorization problems are bigger than ever before.
And especially the authentication, because to your point about we have had this in the sense of I'll throw into microservice architectures, this service identity, should it talk to this other service? A lot of that type of authorization.
Yeah.
But when we get into agents, how much are you seeing that, this agent should be working with mics on my behalf, or this agent is actually its own identity and we need agent name identity
Absolutely.
itself?
This is probably the single biggest problem in identity security today. And again, from my vantage point, I try to draw the trends that have been set in motion 10, 15, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's very clear that 30 years ago, the constraint used to be connectivity and authentication. And increasingly, those two problems are getting commoditized. And the constraint is, the biggest unsolved problem is authorization, which is does an agent, should it have the right level of authorization to a sensitive data? What about if it's acting on behalf of a user? What about if it's acting on behalf of another agent? What if it's acting by itself, right? All of those are very hairy problems with no easy solutions. The best anyone has come up with is that you have to make a decision about an agent's authorization at runtime with the right level of context, right? In other words, it's still very much an authorization problem that the world is trying to address.
And that context, I want to tease out that out a little bit more, because listing off, you need that connectivity, authentication, authorization. Sounds like three simple steps, but there's got to be, you must have like a mental list of, before I'm a developer, before I send something off to prod, what do I need to have in place, or what's the minimum bar should be before this gets blessed into prod?
Oof.
We only have 15 minutes. I know the list could be long.
I know. Well, it's when you're shipping off an agent to production, mm-hmm. right? You absolutely got to ensure that the agent has some guardrails to your sensitive assets, right? Start there. Okay. I'm going to assume that authentication and connectivity are more or less solved problems, which may or may not be true, by the way, right?
Fair.
Like, for example, you still want to ensure that the agent credentials are issued in a short-lived manner and they conform to the best practices of strong credentials, strong passwords, whatever the form factor of those credentials are, right? But as far as authorization is concerned, you want to make sure it is fully governed, it has a human owner, it's being tracked and it's being maintained according to some organizational best practice. Mm-hmm. And then you want to make sure it has the right guardrails to your sensitive assets, whether though that is customer data, whether that's company data, financial data. Every company has a different set of sensitive data and sensitive applications and sensitive infrastructure, right? So you need to make sure it's got, to the extent possible, least privilege, or more importantly, governed access, right? With some guardrails in place. And then the most important thing is that you need to make sure that at runtime, you're getting the context from various systems, right? What are those systems? They could be your HRMS system, right? As an example, if it's an agent, if it's a customer success agent, yep. You want to make sure that it's getting context from a ticketing system, right? You only want that HRMS system to ensure that it's got access to customer data only during the time window when there is a customer success ticket running. Or there's a coding agent with access to production. You only want to make sure it's got access to your production during the time and a production incident is running, right? So it needs to have some level of context into your system, and then you need to ensure that at runtime its access is being granted in a short-lived, just-in-time manner according to that context.
Yeah, and especially that just-in-time access feels like such a great way of just controlling the risk.
it's going to get leaked at some point. But if you can be confidence that the window of exposure was so small, that's a comforting feeling.
Yeah.
And I appreciated the list you gave me. And to be fair, that very much answered my question. But it feels like it was also kind of like the ideal world. That's how things should be. I suspect the real world is a bit messier, and especially with agents. Talking about OpenClaw, shadow AI sneaks in. Developers are moving very quickly. Who knows what agent frameworks they're using these days? You pointed that out as well. Is that governance keeping up with the developers, or how the heck can it keep up?
No, it cannot, right? Its technology is moving just too fast, and for any security leader who attempts to put in these guardrails on right now, there is always a trade-off in slowing down the pace of innovation in an organization, which is not a decision anyone wants to make.
No.
Right? It's not a hill anyone wants to die on.
Yeah.
Right? But again, if you've been a student of history, you'll see the same patterns repeating time and time again. When the cloud started, it was the same story, right? Hey, fantastic! Our TCO is going to go down dramatically. We don't need to worry about capex. Everything is opex, right? And early years it was lift and shift, and then suddenly you realize that there are all of these security nightmares ongoing in your production clouds. And we're still fixing them. We're still fixing the sins of the past, right? And to some extent, a large part of what is happening with agentic and AI is part of the same, right? But the first step is always being aware that the problem exists, and if you don't know a problem exists, you'll never be able to solve it, whether reactively or proactively.
Yeah, and I think on that theme, you've been rightly pointing out, like the cloud S3 buckets. That was a classic case of authentication and authorization wasn't great by default. But organizations have had these tools for identity, from when it was the early days of just terminals to the cloud to agents. What are they missing? Like, are these tools not keeping up? Or are they just not using them right? What's missing from today?
Great question. I think there are two things that are missing. One is technological and the second is organizational. And let me cover both of these one by one.
Okay.
Let me cover the technological aspects first. Historically, identity security has always been synonymous with, as I mentioned earlier, around controls for authentication or controls for network level access, right? Authentication controls could mean setting up a vault and making sure your credentials are stored, vaulted, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And network level controls mean put up your bastions, your gateways, your proxies, your hosts, servers. Like, these come in various different names, but the concept is very much that put in some gateway that controls access.
Yes.
But increasingly in a cloud first and an agentic first world, you are not controlling network traffic, you're not controlling username, password, you are controlling an identity making an API call to a sensitive data, right? It could be a user trying to SSH into an EC2, it could be a user trying to get into an S3 bucket, it could be an agent trying to make a tool call, it could be someone trying to connect to run a query, run an LLM via an MCP onto your Salesforce data. The fundamental thing that is common across all of these is that everything is an API call. Everything is an API call whose authorization and whose scope needs to be governed, right? So that is the first piece that I was talking about, the technical problem. The technical problem in identity security is that we've just not thought about authorization as a control point. People like to say that identity is the control point. I'll take it one step further. Identity is the new perimeter and authorization is its control point, right? So that's the first thing that needs to change, that there needs to be a recognition that authorization is fundamentally this biggest blocker or towards in this new enterprise architecture that we're talking about. And the second piece, as I said, is organizational, right? identity is something that is so foundational to an enterprise security stack. It touches every team within an organization. And when something touches every team, it affects the workflows of every team. There's obviously some resistance to change, right?
It's human nature.
It's human nature. You can't just change things overnight, because you can tell people it's important, but it's not core to their day-to-day job. A developer doesn't get up in the morning thinking about, oh, I need to make sure my identity is correct, right? It needs to work seamlessly behind the scenes. It has to work seamlessly behind the scenes, but it's more organizational, because you need to ensure people are nudged in the right direction. And it's this confluence of technological and human factors which brings us to where we are.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that focus at the end there on, it's still people, regardless of how much we're talking about LLMs, agents, still people reasoning, still people considering what should those control points be. So that's a great message, Shashwat. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here.
Happy to have you here. To learn more about P0 security, please visit securityweekly.com/P0RSAC. And for all of our coverage from RSAC 2026, check out securityweekly.com/RSAC. Stick around. We'll be right back after the break.